am still doing videos. It's 2:40 in the morning. I don't know how long I'm going to be around tomorrow to do videos, so I'm getting those out of the way now. I'm awake, relatively lucid, so, let's do the news. Before we start, if you guys enjoy the content and you find yourself coming back to this station often, please consider supporting the content through PayPal or Patreon. If it gets tougher and tougher every day to do just through YouTube. And there's a security in relying on the audience as opposed to relying on YouTube. That's all. So let's get to the news in this case. In this case, it's going to be with, I guess not news per se, but more so, I wanted to flag what I thought was an interesting conversation with Ocasio-Cortez, where she's making the argument about climate change not being elitist. I've heard people make this argument before, that climate change is somehow an ivory tower issue. That, it's like, I do declare I care about, breathing clean air and drinking clean water. I think that's a bizarre argument to make, that this is somewhat of an elitist thing, even though I understand why the argument is made. But ultimately, that argument is somewhat false, even though there's some truth in the argument itself. I know it sounds like I'm saying two things, and I'll explain what I mean. First, let's listen to Ocasio-Cortez make her argument. Again, I agree with the entirety of this, with a caveat. And the caveat to some degree boils down to an issue of perception. But let's take a listen to Ocasio do her thing.
But aside from that, when we talk about the concern of the environment as an elitist concern, 1 year ago, I was waitressing in a taco shop in downtown Manhattan. I just got health insurance for the first time a month ago. This is not an elitist issue. This is a quality of life issue. You want to tell people that their concern and their desire for clean air and clean water is elitist? Tell that to the kids in the South Bronx, which are suffering from the highest rates of childhood asthma in the country. Tell that to the families in Flint, whose kids have their blood is ascending in lead levels. Their brains are damaged for the rest of their lives. Call them elitist. You're telling them that those kids are trying to get on a plane to Davos? People are dying. They are dying. And the response across the other side of the aisle is to introduce an amendment 5 minutes before a hearing and a markup. This is serious. This should not be a partisan issue. This is about our constituents in all of our lives. Iowa, Nebraska, broad swaths of the Midwest are drowning right now, underwater. Farms, towns that will never be recovered and never come back. And we're here, and people are more concerned about helping oil companies than helping their own families? I don't think so. I don't think so. This is about our lives. This is about American lives. And it should not be partisan. Science should not be partisan. We are facing a national crisis. And if we do not ascend to that crisis, if we do not ascend to the levels in which we were threatened at the Great Depression, when we were threatened in World War II, if we do not ascend to those levels, if we tell the American public that we are more willing to invest and bail out big banks than we are willing to invest in our farmers and our urban families, then I don't know what we're here doing. I don't know what we're here doing.
I love that. God, I love that. Passionate, direct, straightforward. And she brings up several themes in this that I kind of want to touch upon to kind of make the point that I was making before. So this idea of elitist. I've heard this argument, like I said, made before, and I like the way that she kind of goes after this argument. Like, look, it's not elitist for people who are drinking lead-laced water in Flint, or who are breathing air quality that's the worst in the nation in the Bronx. Those things have real quality of life issues. Those things could adversely affect the physical system going far into life. meaning the development of the brain of the individual itself can be adversely affected based on the environmental contaminants that the person is taking in. Breathing bad air, drinking bad water, these things are defects to kids. You know, I guess I'm trying to make the point that if we care about what our nation becomes, we need to deal with where it starts, our kids. Our kids. So in this case, this kind of direct environmentalism is not elitist by any stretch of the imagination. Those things are things that directly affect individuals, their personal physical systems. On the other hand, not having access to the things that you need is also direct. Meaning, if I can't feed myself, that's immediate, direct. I'm hungry. I don't care about the environment. I'm hungry. Same thing with not having somewhere to rent, not having the money to pay for rent, or not having the money to pay for some kind of healthcare issue, not having the money to pay for a car repair issue. All of these things are direct access of needs issue or needs issues. And those needs issues are present and foremost in the individual's mind. How am I going to make sure my kid eats? That weighs on the mind. It's not that the environment doesn't matter. The environment clearly matters. But there's a difference between an environmental issue that's direct, where the individual is affecting the physical system of the individual, and something that's more diffuse. The Green New Deal, of course, is dealing with both, but there's an aspect of the Green New Deal that's dealing with this more diffuse issues of the environment, this kind of issues of climate catastrophe. But that's somewhat different, even though they're within the same thread than the direct environmental issues. I'm hoping being clear on this. This notion that it's elitist, that can be casted a particular way to say that people who care about these kind of overarching environmental issues are somewhat of an ivory tower and distinct enough from their needs where this issue can take a certain prominence. I guess the issue for that then is to essentially bring everyone's standard of living up to the point where they all can pop their heads over the bubble and start caring about environmental issues. Needs matter more. Needs matter more. Because I have to be honest, it is a hard sell to people if their basic requirements of life are not being met. This is where this argument of elitist comes in. This is kind of my point of saying everything that Ocasio-Cortez is saying here is absolutely right. And when she's making the argument for the Green New Deal, she is absolutely right, especially when she's using this rhetoric of World War II and the Great Depression. But the elitist argument is not directly coming from the basic needs thing. It's coming from the more overarching environmental, the people who are looking at this overarching environmental climate change thing. It's so diffuse. It's not necessarily an asteroid hitting the planet, even though for all intents and purposes, it's an asteroid hitting the planet. I hope I'm explaining that adequately. One other point that she was making. Science should not be partisan. That is absolutely correct. Science, unlike politics, has an objective arbiter, reality itself. Meaning gravity is not to be negotiated with. Gravity just is. If you come up with some kind of technical device that can bypass gravity, then that's also just is. But it's just working as some kind of property of reality or science that we're just making use of or exploiting. Politics doesn't have that. Politics has points of view. And even though something can happen in reality, that people can look at it, and if they were being honest, could talk about it, and it would be something similar in regards to stories. Oftentimes, there are situations in which you have opposing viewpoints, and both viewpoints are valid. But oftentimes, you have shallow political gamesmanship. Science, in this case, gets politicized because science is being, at this point, dropped into a partisan problem. Meaning, if ExxonMobil makes billions of dollars, ExxonMobil wants to continue to make billions of dollars. If ExxonMobil wants to continue to make billions of dollars, then the environmental catastrophe that ExxonMobil helped to cause needs to be marginalized. It needs to be attacked. It needs to be vilified. And when you get one of the political parties to do that, the population itself backs the political party. And so everything that the political party is doing, they just kind of accept almost as an act of faith. A Republican is this, in which case they're accepting many of the terms that a Republican takes hold. Despite the fact that some of the stuff is science, in which case it doesn't necessarily care about the partisanship, but they come up with arguments to try to explain why they are right and 90-something% of the scientists are wrong. She's right, but it sucks that this is the way this takes place. Science should not be a partisan issue. But at the point where you have billions of dollars at stake and people donating to campaigns and people having the capacity to go in and out of oil industries, like into government and back into their industries, then you can kind of see this kind of revolving door, and all of these incentives are in order to keep the system the way the system is, whether you have a Democrat or a Republican that's in that office. Just saying. And the last part, the Great War. When the United States went to war in World War I, World War II, Vietnam War, and even the Iraq War, the resources that was expended in those wars were tremendous. Especially when you're talking about World War II, the United States armed the entirety of the world. We were literally the arms supplier of the world. We had 2 military fleets on both sides of the globe. When you're talking about a supreme dominance of the entirety of the planet, the United States had it. Europe was in flames, and we were still cranking out ships, planes, boats, bombs, missiles, bullets. It was our industries. The amount of production that went into that is phenomenal. And we were using that stuff and essentially blowing that stuff up. For all intents and purposes, we could have taken those planes and just flew those planes into a cliff, because those planes were going to get shot up and blown up anyway. The amount of materials, the amount of manpower, the amount of organization skill, it makes the point that the fact that it happened shows that we can do it. We just don't. The fact that you can do it in the context of a war shows proof of concept that you can do it. Now, people will say, well, you're in a war, so what? We have a situation where the globe is at stake. Just because you can't see it as an asteroid, the climate, the planet, the habitable space to which we exist is being destabilized based on the actions of us on this planet, the things that we consider to be normal. And this is taking place because we are stuck to a capitalistic system that prioritizes profit, even over things real like your climate or your environment. She's right. The fact that we did it before, we can do it again, and that mobilization can be for things like climate. The point of her Green New Deal, and the point that she's making that, the reason why she's making that point, is because she's trying to say that in the same way we were mobilized for those things, we could be mobilized for this. Ultimately, she's just looking for an excuse to mobilize. I mean, capitalism for the most part is just creating jobs just to create jobs. At some point, we need to get beyond this idea of people being lazy or people being forced to work and forced into the work industry, and transition out of this idea of human labor for work. We need to automate these positions. We need to realize that many of these positions can be automated. In the same way that you had an elevator person no longer necessary to going up and down the elevator, you will get that way with cars. You would get that way with stores. You would get that way with one industry after the next, particularly when it becomes cheaper to put in the machine as opposed to pay a worker. We need to transition from this, and we need to transition from this while labor is a strong component to having the negotiation in this process, as opposed to getting to the point where labor becomes weaker and weaker and weaker as the market gets more and more automated. The conversation needs to take place now. But nevertheless, Green New Deal, this new capitalistic expansion, and she's making the argument for it. It is not elitist. Again, I agree with the argument that it's not elitist, but I understand where people get that argument from on why, even though I think her argument is right that it's not. I know it sounds like I'm saying two things. I'm not. It really is. It's just a certain degree of nuance. People casting it Well, I've explained it. I think I've explained it adequately. All right, guys, I will end this here. If you guys enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe. You can always support this content through PayPal or Patreon. Thanks, everyone.